Good afternoon. Hope you guys are all doing great. Usually I do a Blazing with Bo hour. That's a reading of stuff by Blaise Pascal, but I have chosen to actually take some time and go over another book with everybody, just to read it. So whether you're working out or you're just hanging out or you're just vegging out or you're cooking some food or whatever you are, put your phones in and take a moment and get some information. So the reason why I chose this book, which is the answer to the Atheist's Handbook by Reverend Richard Wurmbrand, is first because I've always read his magazine that he founded, his nonprofit organization called Voices of the Martyrs, or the Voice of the Martyrs, and then recently over this in this year, the word martyrdom has come up in popular culture. And when that word martyrs comes up, of course, me, and not just me, but many I know Christians, that is, our kind of our eyes perk up, or our ears perk up, and we think of magazines and missions work and things of that nature, about what martyrdom is, and I thought it'd be best if I just read a book, and maybe that would help too people understand that maybe there's a misunderstanding of the term in our day. When we use the word martyr, sometimes we use it in all kinds of different contexts, when it really has quite a narrow context. So I thought maybe it'd be cool to read this, and I know I've never read it, so I was kind of excited to read it too, and I love to read. And so anyway, about the author, Pastor Richard Wurmbrand, 1909 to 2001, was an evangelical minister who endured a total of 14 years of communist imprisonment and torture in his homeland of Romania. Few names are better known in Romania, where he is one of the most widely recognized Christian leaders, authors, and educators. In 1945, when the communists seized Romania and attempted to control the churches for their purposes, Richard Wurmbrand immediately began an effective, vigorous underground ministry to his enslaved people as well as the invading Russian soldiers. He was arrested in 1948 along with his wife, Sabina. His wife was a slave laborer for 3 years on the Danube Canal. It might be, Danube Canal. Richard Wurmbrand spent 3 years in solitary confinement, seeing no one but his communist torturers. He was then transferred to a group cell where the torture continued for 5 more years. During his international stature as a Christian leader, diplomats of foreign embassies asked the communist government about his safety and were informed that he had fled Romania. Secret police posing as released fellow prisoners told his wife of attending his burial in the prison cemetery. His family in Romania and his friends abroad were told to forget him because he was dead. After 8.5 years in prison, he was released and immediately resumed his work with the underground church. A couple of years later, in 1559, he was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Sounds a little bit like Paul the Apostle in the book of Acts. Pastor Wurmbrand was released in a general amnesty in 1964 and again continued his underground ministry. Realizing the great danger of a third imprisonment, Christians in Norway negotiated with the communist authorities for his release from Romania. The communist government had begun selling their political prisoners. The going price for a prisoner at that time was $1,900. The price for Wurmbrand was $10,000. In May of 1966, he testified before the United States Senate International Security Subcommittee and stripped to the waist to show the scars of 18 deep torture wounds covered his torso. His story was carried across the world in newspapers throughout the United States, Europe, and Asia. Wurmbrand was warned in September of 1966 that the communist regime of Romania planned to assassinate him, yet he was not silent in the face of the death threats. Founder of the Christian mission, The Voice of the Martyrs, he and his wife traveled throughout the world establishing a network of over 30 offices that provide relief to families of imprisoned Christians in Islamic nations, communist Vietnam, China, and other countries where Christians are persecuted for their faith. His message has been, hate the evil systems, but love your persecutors, love their souls, and try to win them for Christ. Pastor Wurmbrand authored numerous books which have been translated into over 60 languages. Let's see. Okay. So that's a little bit about him. So if a lot of people don't look at, have never really looked at the statistics on the amount of Christians that are persecuted per year in our world. And you might want to do that if you've never done that before. Hey, take a check at it and take a look, and maybe your mind will start changing a little bit too on some of the current events that go on today, and maybe what you're thinking about those issues as well. And so anyway, it's good for us always to push our intellectual understanding, and I hope it does it. So this is the beginning of this book called The Answer to the Atheist Handbook is the Atheist Handbook. So wherever people know how to write, they have a holy book. Atheists too have one. It's called the Atheist Handbook. It was first published in 1961 by Moscow's Academy of Science, the state publishing house for political science. The Summary of Atheistic Creeds is a collective work of a great number of specialists, such as historians Belaev and Belanova, and philosophers, I can't pronounce these words too well. It looks like Chanaskev, Elshina, and Amila. Its final redactor is University Professor S. Kovalev. I know that from a little bit of hockey. Russian players. This book, which has been reprinted many times, has been translated into many languages. By the way, the first printing, it looks like, of this book was 1975. It's been printed in many languages and widely distributed in other socialist countries. From the primary grades through college, on radio and television, in films, and at atheistic rallies, the ideas contained in this book are propagated. And when an atheist dies, the funeral speech assures his broken-hearted family that the dead are dead forever, that there is no comfort for the bereaved, that those separated now will never more be reunited. There is no God and no such thing as eternal life. The primary purpose of the book is to show that there is no God. And he's talking about the Atheistic Handbook, which was published in 1961 in Moscow's Academy of Science. We could answer very simply with the question, if there is no God, how is it that sheep exist? The question was actually raised at an atheistic meeting in Russia. The lecturer had explained that life appeared spontaneously and developed through natural selection, and that in the cruel fight for survival, only the animals that were stronger or quicker than their neighbors survived, while the weaker succumbed. A believer asked, how is it that sheep survived, that they were not utterly destroyed by wolves? The female wolf produces 5 or 6 offspring a year, the sheep only 1. The ratio 5-to-1 for the destroyer, which has sharp teeth, claws, strength, and swiftness in running. The sheep has absolutely no defense. How is it that there are still sheep? Today man protects them. The animal world existed before man appeared. Who protected the sheep at that time? You can explain many things without resorting to the hypothesis that God exists, but sheep with 4 legs could not exist without him, any more than Christ-loving sheep, who have been defenseless against cruel persecutors since the beginning of the church. The answer this believer got was a few years in Soviet prison. An atheist could get a very simple answer also on the subject of Christ. At a party of intellectuals, Shakespeare was being discussed. Someone quoted Lady Macbeth's words after she had murdered King Duncan in his sleep. Looking at her blood-stained hands, she exclaims, "Out, damned spot! Out, I say!" A Christian asked the question, what are the possibilities of a Lady Macbeth being cleansed of her burden of guilt? One atheist answered, "Man, it is a reasonable thing. It is a reasonable being. A proper education and good advice, even at the last minute, would have kept her from the ugly deed." The reply was of no help. Lady Macbeth had committed a murder, and philosophizing about the education she should have had was useless. Another said, "I believe that murderers should get the death penalty." This proposal, too, was useless, because a man sentenced to death still dies with the consciousness of guilt. A third man assured those present that in the future happy socialist societies there would be no kings, no selfish ambitions to be gratified, no desire to commit crimes. But the fairy tale society exists nowhere. The believer then said, the solution of the Bible remains the only valid one. The blood of Jesus Christ cleanses us from all sin. But we cannot stop with such simple answers. Members of an Academy of Science have written over 600 pages to prove that religion in general, and Christianity in particular, is false. Let us try to understand them and to answer all the points they raise. It is a duty of courtesy and love to accept the challenge. The Atheist Handbook is boring. In fact, it could not be otherwise. Nobody can be eloquent for atheism. Atheism is a denial. Who can write enthusiastically about a negation? Who can address a sonnet to a negation, or dedicate a concerto to a negation, or a sculpture to a negation? Religion has inspired symphonies, paintings, statues, poetry. Atheism, by its very nature, could never have this impact. Atheism has no wings. According to its own doctrine, men are only dust and shadow, mere matter. What impetus has matter to destroy religion? Can matter enlist passion in the fight for an ideal when ideals, not being matter, are by definition nothing? The Atheistic Handbook also uses deceptive methods and violence of speech, which does not suit an Academy of Science well. We propose to avoid as much as possible to the tedium of pseudo-scientific arguments. We will respond even in the face of irony and slander with the sweetness of love. We can afford to take this attitude because good anvils do not fear the blows of many hammers. In Paris there is a monument to the Huguenots showing an anvil and a number of broken hammers with the inscription, "Hammer away, ye hostile bands. Your hammers break, God's anvil stands." We will take this attitude because we ourselves sift our thoughts with severity and consider it an advantage to be criticized. It is to the detriment of atheism in communist countries that it imposes a dictatorship. How can one who doesn't bear criticism know he is right? In all the Christian countries of the West, atheism has full liberty for its propaganda. Christianity has not the slightest reason to fear it. In free debate, only Christianity can win. Imagine two rooms separated from each other by a thick curtain. In one darkness reigns, the other is lighted by a candle. If the curtain is withdrawn, it is not the darkness that prevails. Darkness cannot overcome the light from the candle because it is not energy. It is the absence of light. Only light, being energy, can prevail. Thus the room that was in darkness becomes visible, transformed by the burning candle. Christians have not feared prisons nor the implements of torture, neither do we fear atheist handbooks or books. In the struggle of ideals, the final victory can only be ours. Okay, that's the intro. Now, the intro reminds me a little bit of Christopher Hitchens' brother's book. If you know I would say the infamous Christopher Hitchens, the infamous atheist, that is Christopher Hitchens. Some of his debates are just epic. You can go online and check them out. But his brother, who happens to be a Christian, Peter Hitchens, wrote a book called "The Rage Against God," and you really get an idea of what the impact that socialistic Russia had on Peter Hitchens in his conversion to Christianity. So again, it's always good to know history and read it. And I hope you guys kind of stay with me through these times so we can get through this wonderful book by the founder of The Voice of the Martyrs. Now, I'm going to read the first chapter because it's really short. And these are real short, so it's not going to take us too long to get through the whole thing. But here we go. The Reasonableness of Atheism. Atheists should know, first of all, that we Christians are not their enemies, but their friends. We love atheists, and love understands. We are not surprised that there are atheists. In the 20th century, when millions of innocent men, women, and children have been burned in furnaces, gases, or otherwise killed in concentration camps of different political regimes, some of which proclaimed themselves Christians, it is difficult to believe in a God who is both almighty and good. If he is almighty, why did he not prevent the atrocities? If he is good, why did he create a world of such cruelty? We cannot approach someone for being an atheist when high prelates of the Christian church are often on the side of oppressors and exploiters, when they flatter tyrants or fight together with rebels, among whom are those who dream of becoming the tyrants of tomorrow. When Jesus hung powerless on the cross, he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It must have been difficult to convince anyone that this crucified man was the hope of humanity, or that the one who thirsted after water but received only vinegar possessed all power in heaven and earth. It took a resurrection to make the proclamation of the truth possible. Those who call themselves after the name of the Son of God have killed each other in 2 world wars. A man baptized in the name of Christ gave the order to drop the first atomic bomb. And then, even if prodigal sons would like to return to the Father's house, they would not know where to find it. In its stead, there are many divergent denominations, each claiming to have the truth. They are united in only one point, not to practice the all-embracing love for innocents still behind bars or who have died in the concentration camps. Furthermore, in the minds of multitudes, religion is tied up with superstition, backwardness, or strange dogmas. Atheism is the effect of these as well as many other causes. We cannot expect otherwise. It is only logical that many should be atheists. God allowed room for atheism in the world. The Bible teaches that God created a material world with intrinsic laws and an endless chain of causes and effects. He allows men to exist. Therefore, the possibility of atheism was contained in the plan of creation, and when it was decided that Christ would atone by his blood for the sins of mankind, he agreed to atone for the sins of atheists too. If God allows atheism to exist, who are we to forbid it? We have full understanding for atheists. But atheists, on the other hand, have to account for what is from their standpoint an anomaly. Many of those who suffer horribly in this world created by God love him with all of their heart. Tradition and custom can account for church-going and attendance at religious rituals. But how can atheists explain that a burning love for God is sometimes seen precisely in the men who suffer most? How can they explain what Christians call joy in the Lord, felt by men who are beaten and tortured for their faith and who have 50-pound chains at their feet? Religion is flourishing in some very poor countries. Hungry men gather on Sundays with starving children and sing of the glory of God. Why? How is it that widows with only 2 mites for their living gladly give their last coins in order that God may be served with greater pomp? The question posed to Christians by atheists are reasonable. If God is almighty, why does he allow death to rule on earth? Why have I been bereft of all my most beloved? Asks the atheist. Why does my child suffer or my friend die young? But how can atheists explain the fact that other men similarly bereaved of themselves facing death accept tragedy with serenity and even joy? From then death means to go to the Father. From the time of building the pyramids, when slaves died under the whip and denial of God or rebellion against him would have seemed normal, a poem has come down to us. Death is my sight today, like the recovery of a sick man, like going down or going out into the open after a confinement. Death is my sight today, like the odor of myrrh, like sitting under an awning on a breezy day. Death is my sight today, like the odor of lotus blossoms, like sitting on the banks of drunkenness. Death is my sight today, like the passing away of rain, like the return of men to their houses from an expedition. Death is my sight today, like the clearing of sky, like a man flowing thereby for what he knew not. Death is my sight today, like the longing of a man to see his house again after he spent many years held in captivity. Some men accepted death with serenity, others with joy, considering that to die meant to return to the world of the spirit. Some plants are heliotropic, turning toward the sun, but there are also plants which grow only in shade or darkness. Just as there are men who love God in proportion to their suffering for him, there are the ascetics, the martyrs. They lovingly bear all the hardships about which the atheists complain. Suffering does not make them swerve in their faith. On the contrary, some are brought to faith or strengthened by deep suffering. Oscar Wilde cared nothing of God and led a life of depravity. In the end, the genius found himself in jail under the most degrading accusations. Under these circumstances, he wrote, "If the world has been built of sorrow, it has been built by the hands of love. Because in no other way could the soul of man for whom the world was made reach the full stature of its perfection." In Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov has a discussion with Sonia, a prostitute. She took this profession because her father was a drunkard and her younger brothers and sisters hungered. She suffered terribly under this condition imposed upon her by bitter circumstances. Raskolnikov asked her, "You pray to God a lot, Sonia?" And she answered in a whisper, "What would I be without God?" He, probing deeper, asked again, "But what does God do for you in return?" Her reply is, "Don't ask me. You don't deserve to know. He does everything." Raskolnikov, let me get this right. Raskolnikov also questioned her poor, miserable younger sister, Polenka. "Do you know how you say prayers?" Her answer was, "Oh, of course, we all know. We have for ages. Now that I am a big girl, I say my prayers to myself, but Kola and Lida say them aloud with Mama. First they say, God bless and forgive our sister Sonia, and then God bless and forgive our second father, because our first daddy is already dead, and this one is our second one. How is it that the Sonias and the Polinkas love God? Could their religion be only a pain reliever like drugs or alcohol? But drugs and alcohol destroy the minds of men. Her faith in God made Sonia so strong that she could bring to repentance the murderer Raskolnikov and lead him to become a new man. So there must be some kind of reality behind her faith. Sonia gave to Raskolnikov a cross and read to him from the Gospels. This made an undiscovered murderer surrender himself to the police, go to Siberia, and start a new life. What would have happened if she had given him the hammer and sickle and had read him one of Stalin's tedious speeches or Marx's Das Kapital? Sonia, caught in the tragedy of prostitution, and Raskolnikov, awakened from the tragedy of crime, believed. For many, religion is just one of the many joys of life, a refinement like art or luxury. But there are those to whom it means everything, who pant after God as a deer pants after rivers of water. These claim to know God. They say that he is lovable and trustworthy, even if his ways are mysterious and if life is very hard on them. They understand the atheist phenomenon. But can atheists understand them? In September 1932, a Moscow magazine, Molodaya Gardia, the Young Vanguard, announced that in accordance with the atheistic 5-year plan, by 1937, every manifestation of religion will be definitely destroyed, and the Word of God must be silenced forever. But this did not happen. On the contrary, Christianity was flourishing even in communist countries, though long prohibited and threatened with persecution. Why? Atheism is reasonable only when it discovers the reason for deep faith. Okay, so that's the first chapter, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. So let's see. So that was called the Reasonableness of Atheism, and the next chapter will be the Unreasonableness of Atheism. And you know what? Let's read it. Since it's real short and we got a little time, we can continue on and do it. So this is the Unreasonableness of Atheism. Society is changing very quickly. Religious systems have not kept pace with the transformations. Often preachers comment on debates Jesus had with men 2,000 years ago regarding problems of the time instead of providing answers in the spirit of Christ to the problems of modern man. Therefore, many come to the conclusion that religion is irrelevant. In addition, many rituals are obsolete. Further, churches assert their wish to save men from a future hell. Then they should prove their love toward men by helping save the world from today's hell of illiteracy, hunger, misery, tyranny, exploitation, and war. Christians accept all of these criticisms from atheists. Charity believes all things. We can believe the reasons for being an atheist. We say with Hegel, everything which exists is reasonable. Even an atheist's attitude can have profound reasons. But atheists are at a disadvantage when they refuse the criticism of believers. The man united with God's Spirit can understand those who do not worship God because they know not God. The Christian mind mirrors the whole of reality, the atheist mind only part of it. Atheists have a materialistic philosophy that Christians share. The principal doctrine of our religion is that God has become flesh, matter, in Christ Jesus. The Christian God is not an idea, but a person. The aim of Christianity is not the salvation of souls, but the resurrection of the body in incorruptibility. But we do not stop at materialism. Materialistic atheists are one-sided. They do not know about the Godhead and this eternal spirit of love and truth who rules this world. Has anyone ever seen a coin with only one face, or electricity with only one pole? Christianity embraces the realm of the spirit as well as the material because it is one-sided. Because it is one-sided, atheism is false. A fool was sent to buy flour and salt. He took a dish in which to carry his purchases. He was told not to mix the two ingredients, but to keep them separate. After the shopkeeper had filled the dish with flour, the fool, thinking of the instructions, inverted the dish, asking the salt to be poured on the upturned bottom. Therewith the flour was lost, but he had the salt. He brought it to his boss, who inquired, "But where is the flour?" The fool turned to the dish over to find it, so the salt was gone too. Atheists sometimes act like this man. They bring every earnest and useful criticism against religion. They have the salt, but do they not thereby lose the flour? Do they not throw away arguments for religion which may also be right? And in the end, will they not have to shed the salt of atheism too, in moments of deep crisis? It is the pride of true Christianity to have the flour and the salt. Its philosophy is what Soloviev called theomaterialism, comprehending matter and theos, in Greek, God. Its creator. Indeed, Christianity is so sure about the truth it possesses that it is open to all criticisms of this truth. Yes, it even welcomes such criticisms as a spur that ensures a better ride on the horse of truth. Faith lives by continual rejection of errors and continual acceptance of inspiration from quarters where new truths have been experienced. Once the sun quarreled with the moon. The sun said, "The leaves on the trees are green," whereas the moon said that they are the color of silver. The moon asserted that men on the earth generally sleep, whereas the sun said that usually all men are moving. The moon asked, "Then why is there such a silence on the earth?" "Who told you this?" the sun answered. On earth there is much noise. The strife lasted a long time." And when the wind came, he listened to the debate and smiled. Your quarrel is in vain. I blow when there is sun and when the moon shines. During the day when the sun shines on the earth, everything happens just as the sun said. There is noise on the earth, and men work, and the leaves are green. By night, when the moon rises, everything is changed. Men sleep, silence reigns, and the color of the leaves changes to silver. Sometimes when a cloud covers the moon, they even look black. Neither you, sun, nor you, moon, know the whole truth. Atheists look at the material side of things and believe they encompass all reality. Buddhists believe that mind is the only reality and that the material world belongs to Maya, the sphere of illusion. But the Bible uses, in the Hebrew as well as in the Greek, the same word for spirit as for the wind. It blows at all times, from many quarters. Those who have the Spirit of God see the whole of reality. They cannot limit themselves to either the materialist philosophy or the idealist one. As a matter of fact, the Bible warns us to be careful in philosophical matters, because most philosophers have individual points of view from which they look at reality. But every point of view is a point of blindness. It incapacitates us for every other point of view. From a certain point of view, the room in which I write has no door. I turn around, now I see the door, but the room has no window. I look up. From this point of view, the room has no floor. I look down, it has no ceiling. By avoiding particular points of view, we are able to have an intuition of the whole. The ideal for the Christian for a Christian is to become holy, a word that derives from whole. In Russian, the word holy, svatoi, suggests luminosity. The same is true in the Germanic idioms. To be holy means to have abandoned points of view. Feuerbach, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Feuerbach said, "It is clear as the sun, as evident as the day, that there is no God, and still more, that there can be no God. It is not religion which asserts absolute clearness, but atheism. If the non-existence of God is as clear as the sun, how is it that all mankind without exception acknowledges the existence of the sun, but not all mankind subscribes to the assertion of Feuerbach's that there is no God?" Not even Darwin, the great favorite of my opponents, could adhere to it. He wrote, "The impossibility of convincing that this grand and wondrous universe with our conscious selves arose through chance seems to be, to me, the chief argument for the existence of God. For atheism is self-evident. Then why the need to propagate the obvious? Christians do not consider Christianity as self-evident as the fact that 2 and 2 are 4. If it were so, there would be no atheists. We find some of the attitudes of our opponents sensible. There is a place in our understanding for them. Atheism has only atheism and denies to religion every right to exist. Therefore, it is not sensible." Max Stirner, the theoretician and individualist anarchism, rightly saw the evils of society. His solution was to liquidate human society. But he was a part of it. Schopenhauer's school recommended suicide to mankind as an answer to its problems. But when cholera broke out in his town, he fled. He loved life. In the same category are those who wish to get rid of religion itself because of its great shortcomings in thought and deed. Should we give up wearing coats because some have an unpleasant color? Should we throw away the clean baby with the dirty bathwater? We have acknowledged that what is reasonable in atheism, there is much besides. Now let atheists seek together with us what is reasonable in religion. Maybe we will arrive at a common denominator. Okay, great. So that's an interesting chapter as well. And so it's so far it's a good book, right? And hopefully it's one where people think through some of these things that Reverend Wurmbrand is reading, or what he's writing about. And so I've always thought about some of these things as well. Growing up more atheistic, of course, the last thing I wanted to do was to think about God and to maybe even contemplate if there is a God. And though I know many people did believe in God strongly in my life and in my culture, and I always wondered why and those kind of things. And a lot of times I would set up straw man arguments and knock them down, or I would use logical fallacies of just criticizing people instead of actually looking into things at all. So, sometimes it's hard for us to look at other points of view. And, I like the idea that sometimes I like what he was talking about when he was talking about kind of the sun looking at things and saying, hey, everything's really lively on Earth, and the moon saying, hey, everything's kind of mellow on Earth, and the wind saying, well, you guys are both right. And that, sometimes when you study philosophy or you read philosophers, they're always looking at it from one point of view. And that's the funny part, is some of them will come up with really cool things like we can't really know anything, and they'll say things like that, that we really, how do we know, how can we even know anything? But the statement alone makes no sense, right? If you can't know anything, then what you just said, we can't even know that. So it's like everybody it's like amazing how even in philosophy you all get one-sided, and sometimes in social issues too we get one-sided, where you might see something happen and you all of a sudden go with the tide that this is the right way to go, when maybe it's not the right way to go, and you have to take a step back and you have to look at other things, and that takes time and that takes effort, and it might change your perspective, and it might not be a popular perspective. And but as Christians, this is what we see in the Bible all the time, is those always looking at what God's perspective is on things, and moving in that direction. And what Reverend Wurmbrand's getting at is that many Christians have done that with incredible joy, that they've gone against the tide through the years. And again, I challenge you to look at today's statistics on persecution, even just Christian persecution, not just religious persecution, but Christian persecution, and see what the numbers are today. And maybe that'll challenge your thinking as well. And it's really radical when you start thinking, hey, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm going in the wrong direction, and maybe some of my using my time, treasure, and talents in this direction is not the correct thing, and maybe I'm not seeing things in the right way. And so, anyway, we will read the founder of the Voice of the Martyrs book, and I think it's a popular one. Remember that what he's writing against, again, is what's called the Atheistic Handbook that came out in 1961 by Moscow's Academy of Science. And so that's kind of what he's writing about. And I really love that Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment quote, and especially that one about the power to change Raskolnikov and change him from being a murderer to changing his life. That the prostitute did that. That what was the power in what that prostitute was saying that could change this person's life, to make him surrender to the government and literally move him into a different role. What was the power behind what she was talking about? And his challenge was, what can atheists say? What can atheists do? Where's the power in the atheistic world when times are tough? What is the answer? So it sounds like what he's getting at so far. So the next chapter will be the wrong perspective of the Atheist Handbook. And you know what? It's 43 minutes in. Let me just read this next one, because I'm kind of into this. And it hasn't even been an hour yet. And if you're working out, you need to work out an hour. So let's knock this out. The wrong perspective of the Atheist Handbook. The authors of the Atheist Handbook have written a book about the greatest problems of life, problems over which the greatest minds have pondered since man began. The role of religion. It says the existence of God, the sense of life, its hopes and sorrows, the role of religion, and so on. Who are these individuals? Is it much more important to know them than the contents of their book? To know the teacher is much more valuable than to know his teachings. Knowledge always proceeds from what I am. If I do not know the answer to this, how do I know what is... wait, let me get that straight. If I do not know the answer to this, how do I know that what this I thinks is worth being shared with others? If the I is not great, everything it gives will be small change. Atheists say that they were not created by God. There was no design in the random process of matter that produced them. Can the whirling of atoms and protons and their accidental combining together produce a brain that will distill pure truth? Good question, right? I like that one. Can a whirling of atoms and protons and their accidental combining together produce a brain that will distill pure truth? I was a poor child. I would have liked to learn music, but my parents could not afford it. So I wrote music notes at random on a lined piece of paper, but they never produced a melody. If, say, in the game of roulette, there are two possibilities that a red or a black number will come up, the chance of a number turning up in the same color 40 times in a row is perhaps 1 in 100 million. This when there are only two possibilities. How many chances were there that such a perfect computer as the human mind should be produced by an accidental union of electrons and protons? I, the author of this book, speak many languages, and know something like 1 million words. If I count all the inflections of the verbs and nouns, like any cultured man, I have millions of bits of knowledge in mathematics, geography, physical science, art, etc. at my command. Yet at any given moment, the mind can extract exactly the right word, with exactly the correct intonation, backed by the most suitable attitude expressive of character that the occasion requires. The possibility that this one phenomenon, let alone the organization of the whole universe, could be the product of an accidental coming together of elementary particles arising from nothing is mathematically impossible. If I count 3 generations in a century and begin to calculate how many ancestors I have, 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on, I quickly reach figures of tens of millions of men from whom I have inherited a genetic stock. I am the selected product of a struggle for life in which millions of predecessors were involved. What do I know about them? Nothing. What do I know about the heredity I have received from them? They formed the language in which I think. They created the institutions in which I was brought up. I do not know them. I do not know my own childhood, which is the most decisive period in the shaping of a future teacher of atheism or religion. I live in an unspeakable small world. Our earth is a bit of a dust in the universe. We consider it a noteworthy achievement to have reached a minuscule satellite of this speck of dust. On our small earth, the biosphere is a small thing. So also mankind that dwells in the biosphere. As for me, I am a most insignificant individual among billions. Scarcely 1 in 10,000 will have ever heard the titles of the greatest books that have been written. Not 1 in 1,000,000 will have read them. How many know the existence of a most reverend bishop or about a member of the Soviet Academy, co-author of the Atheist's Handbook? I once had a lapse of memory. I cannot remember who had written Crime and Punishment. It was only the 20th man I asked who could tell me that it was Dostoevsky. We are indefinitely small, and we know as much about what we should, or we know as much about what should rather be called the pluriverse than universe, as an ant knows about Marxism after walking over a book of Marx. I enjoy the chirping of birds, not knowing which of them will be captured by an eagle this very day. I hear the wind passing through the branches, but I do not know which tree is being eaten by a worm. We are greedy for fame, power, money, pleasure, knowledge. Those who had the same greed a couple of decades before us are now clay. Bukharin was one of the greatest theoreticians of communist atheism. In his book Dialect Materialism, he began by praising this philosophy because he said it allows for the possibility of foreseeing the future. The only thing the poor man did not foresee was that his own comrades would torture and kill him. It is a daring thing to write a book to become a teacher of humanity. Can one know what joys and tragedies will be experienced by future readers, and whether one's book will be helpful in moments of great trial? Does a man know even one of the billions of cells that constitute his brain? A small disturbance in them can make one write foolish things. This has happened to geniuses. Can it happen to you? You recognize madness in the writings of others. Can there be none in yours? You know nothing about your body. What do you know about the depths of your psychology? I am daily a surprise to myself. I like that. I am daily a surprise to myself. We live mysterious lives in a mysterious world, of which we know only some fringes. We are imprisoned in jail of our senses. If there were on earth beings that could emit rays outside the spectrum of our vision, if they could communicate among themselves on a wavelength beyond those who hear or apprehend, then they could observe us, and we would never know anything about their existence. Just as we lived for millenniums without knowing about the influence of viruses or microbes on our lives. What if angels do exist and we are unable to perceive them? Atheists assert there is no God. How can they be so sure? The book you are reading was conceived in a prison. The guards regularly searched our cells for forbidden objects, such as chessmen, knives, needles, books, and paper. They did not find them. We waited until they had left. Then we took them out of their hiding places. You search a cell for an object, and you do not find it. But is it right to maintain that it is not there? Who has searched the infinite universe to ascertain that there is no God? Therefore, can you know for sure the things which you assert? Until recently, it was considered a certainty that the simple elements were immutable. This was an assertion based on thousands of years of experience, but nevertheless it was false. Men of considerable intellect were sure that the atom was invisible and that man could not fly to the moon. These who had overwhelmingly experience of mankind on their side erred. How many chances have you to be right? The Christian teacher Toltarian has been much belittled for his words, credo quia impossibile. I believe because it is impossible. And now science makes real just what appeared absurd and impossible to reason. We are small and insignificant. We do not know. If anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing, yet as he ought to know, says the Bible. 1 Corinthians 8:2. Okay, so I like that Bible passage, right? If anyone thinks that he knows anything, he knows nothing yet as he ought to know. 1 Corinthians 8:2. Okay, so that was the wrong perspective of the Atheist Handbook. So they're coming at the ideas that we know everything, and Reverend is challenging them with that. Do you really know everything? What do you really know? And I've always thought that too. Hey, if people didn't know everything back 100 years ago, and they, sometimes we complain about society now, and I'm sure back then they thought their society was horrible, and they try to change theirs, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. Things continue. And there's an infinite almost regression, right? Like an infinite regression of just a repetitive, the way we think, right? Our ways are right. We have it all down. Well, we really don't have it all down. 100 years from now, they're going to think we don't have it all down. So just as they did back then. Anyway, hey, it's a good time just reading over these things. Hope you enjoyed them. Hope you see to some relation to our world today as well. Okay, so you guys have a great one, and we'll talk to you next Saturday. Bye-bye.